Good evening, and welcome to another episode on the Media and Society. Tonight's guest is a phenomenal and passionate educator. We're going to take some time tonight, and he's going to help us decipher a lot of things that are going on in higher learning. Tonight's show title is Higher Learning. Tonight's guest is Dr. David Childs, an esteemed author, pastor, and professor at Northern Kentucky University. He teaches courses in social studies methods, race and ethnicity, education, history, theology, and graduate courses. Tonight, he will help us decipher some very important issues going on in higher education. From the defeat of affirmative action, college funding disparities, and last but never least, we're going to get to discuss his novel, Escaping from Home, a novel about slavery and freedom. Welcome, Dr. Childs. We are highly happy, very happy to have you here on the Media and Society. How are you this evening?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Dr. Childs, tell the audience a bit about yourself.
As you have already stated, I teach at Northern Kentucky University, and I've been there. This is my 13th year, and my areas are history, Black studies, social studies in general, and I also have some administrative responsibilities. I run the Black Studies program at Northern Kentucky University, and my work is around education, African American education, Black studies, diversity, equity, inclusion, and contemporary issues. And so, in another capacity, as you said, I also pastor a church, an urban church, and we do a lot of nonprofit work. It's a 501c3, and we work with housing insecurity, homelessness, addiction, and food insecurity. So we do a lot of work there as well.
That's awesome. Out of all those things that you do, what motivates you the most to just keep plugging on when you hear all the negativity that comes around to the homeless or comes around to take down minority and marginalized communities?
Well, what motivates me the most is my mantra is paying it forward. As a youth, I found myself with housing insecurity. I didn't always have a stable place to stay. And furthermore, as a child, we grew up in an urban environment, and we didn't always have resources and food, just basic resources. And so through education and just having people that really believed in me, I was able to rise above those circumstances. And so that always pushes me. And just the reason I'm so passionate about social justice issues is because I was able to experience, it was I guess you would say, a blessing and a curse. I was able to experience homelessness and being a youth that people had given up on. And a lot of the issues was that we did not have the resources, and that policy, it had to do with policy, and which affects who gets resources, what group of people get resources, and who does not. And racism had a lot to do with it, injustice. And so I was able to see that firsthand. And so when I was able to be in a position to where I could help and also speak truth to power and shine a light in darkness, I'm going to do that really until my last day. That's my motivation. I'm here to give back. I have a burden on my shoulders to give back and to empower people, whether that be with knowledge or resources or both. And so just a huge motivation, along with my children and my wife and children as well. They motivate me as well.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Kids will definitely motivate us to do things and go above and beyond as men.
Yes.
Here's a question. So I want to get into your book. It's interesting that you took this approach. It's almost like a children's book, giving them understanding about some things about slavery. And I mean, and in this day and time where we have states that are just getting rid of African American history and rewriting it and washing it down so it doesn't hurt or offend one part of our population. What motivated you to make this novel?
That's a good question. It's a really big question, actually. I used to teach at a historically Black college in Ohio, Central State University. I co-taught the course with my colleague, Dr. Jim Stone. Dr. Jim Stone, interestingly enough, and I was much younger then when we first started talking about the book. I was a young African American professor from the inner city, and Dr. Stone was probably 20 years older than myself. But we both liked literature and history. So we co-taught a course. I did the history part, and he did the language arts part. And we were always talking about books. We were always talking about the authors we had read: James Cone, Toni Morrison, Virginia Hamilton, Maya Angelou, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe, the autobiography of Malcolm X. So we were always passionate about books. We had this ongoing conversation about novels and literature and Black history. This is the white guy, and he knew more Black history than most Black folks, and that was exciting to me. And so we talked about history all the time. And he said we should write a book for young people so we can try to provide more resources to teach this history, because our mantra is African American history is American history. Often when people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they think it belongs to people of color, to minoritized people. But it's our story. I think if more Americans understood Black history, Native American history, women's history as our story, a part of the larger story, we would have less racism. We can combat it better. And so he and I were always talking about African American history. And we said we should write a book for youth, for middle school, high school, and also be accessible for college-age students, because I use it in my college classes as well. And so Dr. Stone sent me a couple of chapters or a couple of pages of the first chapter. And he said, see what you can do with this. And I had never written a book before. I wrote my dissertation, though. I did do my doctoral dissertation, which was on African American history and education in the Black church. And so I said, yeah, I'll take a stab at it. And we kept at it. Unfortunately, Dr. Stone got really, really sick early on in the process. And so I finished I did most of the book. And that's how it came about. We wanted to write something that our students could use, where we could teach Black history in a narrative fashion. We wanted to form real characters and have them live inside the 1860s, and to help people understand what it would be like to be on a slave plantation in the 1860s. We dealt with issues of literacy, Black religion. We dealt with poor whites and the interaction of the resentment that poor whites had towards enslaved people at that particular time. We dealt with the day in, day out of being enslaved, the clothes, how they ate, what the dwellings were like. And then actually, this is the first edition. We're working on the second edition because we really want to expand on it. And then I have another book coming out that I want to talk about, not too much, but hidden curriculum, teaching Black history. Is all about teaching Black history. So that's another conversation. And so, yeah, and now it's in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and we use it at Northern Kentucky University.
Oh, that's great. So when you're saying you're using this book at NKU, how are you actually teaching this book? Are you just teaching in the education side or just in your history side?
Great question. Both. When I'm working with, you're asking some great questions. One of the capacities I teach in at Northern Kentucky University is I teach teachers. In the College of Education, we're working with the new generation of teachers that are getting certified in Kentucky and Ohio. And our students go all over the not only the United States. I currently have a student in Mexico right now, and I'm working with her. She's doing her student teaching in Mexico. And so we're working with middle school and high school teachers, and occasionally I work with the elementary teachers. And we teach them how to teach history, language arts in an effective, creative way to reach people. And in that class, I'm always intentionally teaching Black history and diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I know in many cases they're not going to get it anywhere else. These folks have gone through the whole K-12 process and all the way through college. And I work with primarily seniors and graduate students, and they get to me and in their final year in college, and many have never had anything on diversity, equity, inclusion. They certainly have not had much in African American history. And so what I do is I integrate that into the coursework, and we use that book as a primer, as one of their resources, because I have them create lesson plans.
Okay.
And show them how to use that book to teach various aspects of Black history. I use it in my hip hop studies class.
Wow.
Because I want the hip hop studies people to understand the origins of hip hop come from the Black community, the Black and Latino community. So I said, let's go back. Let's look at some of the early days of the Black culture, so we can understand how hip hop is rooted in struggle and discrimination, and comes out of that. So, in a lot, both history and education department, we use the book.
Interesting. So, what's been your most difficult? Well, here's what I'd like to know. So, with this book, how difficult was it for the college to allow you to even implement it into some of your lessons?
Well, the book came about surprisingly. Most universities are progressive. You could probably go to the most conservative state like Florida, and there's not going to be a fight in terms of what curriculum you can use. I think that has changed in Florida now, of course.
Yeah, but, unfortunately.
But most of my career, all of my career, I've been able to use the books that I feel convicted to use with my expertise. I have a doctorate. I'm saying this for the benefit of the audience. I'm a poor boy. My parents are from the projects. I have a doctorate in history and education. I have a doctorate of divinity. I have 2 doctorates. I have a master's in social studies education. I have another master's in African American history and American studies. And so, from my expertise, I should be privy to use the curriculum I feel best, because I've studied this material.
Gotcha.
And so my supervisors, my deans, and the department chairs, they're always respectful of what I'm using. Even the college president, my current president, she follows my work. And so right now in Kentucky, that's not contested at all. You'll see that in the high schools, but even in the high schools, I'm in the high schools and all the way down to the elementary schools. I was just in a 6th grade class from last year. The principal brought me in, and they graciously purchased a number of my books and implemented into the curriculum. And so you'll hear the rhetoric of the scary talk about people going into schools and dictating curriculum and what people can use, but there's still a groundswell, an overwhelming amount of progressive teachers, principals. I work with superintendents that are super progressive and wanting to diversify their curriculum. And so we're not at the point yet in my world where I'm being restricted. Although I have gotten death threats, and that's a different kind of conversation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because we keep interviewing people that are trying to do so much for those that are lower income or just having not in some of the marginalized communities, and they're all seem to be getting these threats.
Right.
They're trying to do the right thing and they get threats. It doesn't make any logical sense. You have people that are trying to do everything for you and on your behalf. And I don't know, hey, not to get over religious, but I mean, Jesus went through it, and I'll just be honest. Let's be real. He was trying to do things for people on a regular basis, and look what happened. So
James Cone, one of the books I use in my class, James Cone was an African American historian and theologian. He wrote a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And what he does is, as a theologian, as a historian, he shows parallels between he doesn't say that the Black community is like Christ, but he shows those parallels of Christ suffering on the cross and the Black community being able to relate to that because they've been lynched historically. And so it was an ancient lynching, and
that's exactly right.
Especially when you use the broader definitions. A lot of scholars use a broader definition of lynching. So it's not just being hung from a tree, but they also include being shot, being, dragged from a horse. So it's a broader definition of lynching that we've experienced. And us Christians, we can identify with that.
So much we could continue to unpack on this topic. I mean, I look forward
Right.
to it. And I'm looking forward to your next book, because that's super interesting to me. So I definitely want to hear you see where your book goes. The next one with the curriculum and teaching in the curriculum, how to teach it. So
Well, if you don't mind, I can speak on that a little bit.
absolutely, go for it.
Um, the reason why we talked about this book originally during the pandemic,
Hmm.
and my co-authors came and said we need to push this book forward, especially now,
Hmm.
because it was during the pandemic. It was you saw some of the rhetoric, and people were trying to make diversity, equity, inclusion programs illegal, and we saw a lot of that. And so one of my co-authors said we definitely need to get this book out. And so it's going to be all about. It's going to include a couple of different things. There's going to be some content. This is for university students and higher and the scholarly community, but it's also consumable to the general public.
Gotcha.
There's going to be chapters on just teaching Black history, and chapters on Black history in general, the history of education, Black education, enslavement. But there's also going to be some chapters on the challenges of teaching Black history and how to teach Black history and what you're going to be up against. So it's going to be a really relevant text to the things that we're going through right now.
What a great segue. I mean, I mean, that sounds perfect. But let's segue to this. So with Black history and just history in general being washed over, because it's not even just African American history, they're talking about getting rid of a lot of things in history, even down to the Holocaust and things like that. They like to try to remove or soften it. What can we do? What are you guys doing on the college level to try to fight that and combat that? Because these students are going to come in none the wiser. They're not even going to have a lot of the historical knowledge that you would expect them to have. So what are you guys going to do to compensate for that?
Yeah, we're doing a number of different things. One of the things we talked about is alternative educational spaces, because as I was saying, we work with teachers, and a lot of our teachers are afraid. They're saying, Dr. Child, we don't know what we're going to do if they're challenging the teaching of Black history. Let's just take that one. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've had fifth grade teachers come to me saying that. And we say there's different ways to get at it. You can get at it through literature, which is why we wrote the book. You can include literature in your classroom. And then also there are all these alternative spaces that are not necessarily regulated by the government. I've been seeing churches, for example, hosting African American programs, nonprofits, community centers hosting teaching of African American history. In fact, I've been quite busy myself going to churches and nonprofits teaching Black history, trying to circumvent what the government is doing. And so in terms of the university, what we're doing is one of the things we required one of the classes that our teachers must take, at least one, and we're trying to implement more for the teachers at Northern Kentucky University to get certified in elementary education or middle school teaching education, or at the high school level, whether it be language arts, social studies, whatever, even science teachers, they're required to take a semester of multicultural education, a class on diversity. And we're trying to also implement a class on culturally relevant pedagogy, which means that I need to be able to adjust my pedagogy and my teaching to the population that I'm working with.
Interesting.
Okay. And I need to have that skill set. And so my wife is at a school. She's a high school teacher. She teaches Spanish. And she's got, sometimes her entire class is Hispanic. Or then she's got another class with mostly African Americans. It's a very diverse school. Why wouldn't I spend time dealing with African American history, the Harlem Renaissance, hip hop history, the jazz age, even ancient Africa? Why wouldn't I spend time dealing with that if I have a majority of Black students or Latino students? So we need to be able to adjust as educators. That's what we're teaching our students. So regardless of what you run up against, I tell students to do their job. And then some teachers are being clever where they're changing the name. They don't call it diversity. They say belonging or justice courses or classes that help you feel like you belong and fit in, you know, and they change the word. They still teach Black history and or they call it American history. And then we're going to teach American history because African American history is American history. And so at the university, we're really out front. Every one of our administrators are unapologetic about pushing forward the embracing of a diverse world, you know, knowing that we're going to have students that are of a Muslim background. We're going to have Saudi students. We're going to have Mexican students in our world. The world is diverse. And how can we, the better we reach our people, the better off we are as a society. But when we start excluding folks, we go back to totalitarianism. We go back to Nazism when we start labeling people and saying, we're only going to teach this curriculum, a Eurocentric curriculum. This is the best curriculum. This is the best history. And if you're teaching something else, you're being negative. That's the totalitarian mindset.
That's interesting you say that because, you know, I've always felt personally that if you don't understand history or know history, you're doomed to repeat history, right?
Right.
And I think that's what a lot of us in the African-American culture have been brought up to really understand. But it's almost like we're the only ones having to understand that. I'm not saying that there aren't white people that don't understand that logic, but it seems like we have to understand it, and we're hoping that they begin to try to take that same understanding and approach with learning and history.
And one of the things I always say is part of the reason why we're in the situation we are in now, where there's the perpetuation of racism. It seems like the racist voices are getting louder, and the misunderstanding of our history is the social studies classroom. History has not been taught right in many of our elementary classrooms, in our middle school classrooms, the secondary classrooms. And everybody on the call today and everybody that's listening can go back, and just about everybody, unless you went to a really progressive school, we all know that we got a very poor representation of history.
Absolutely.
I remember the little bit of African-American history I got was on slavery. We did a day on enslavement if we were lucky. And if you went to a predominantly white school, you felt awkward being in that classroom because all eyes were on you. And we got our teachers did a sham job, and God bless my teachers, they did a sham job of teaching history. And so even today, because I supervise teachers all the time, I have student teachers in the field, and I go supervise them and evaluate them. And even to this day, when you go to the classroom and you look at a textbook, Black history is sometimes a paragraph or a sentence in the entire U.S. history textbook. And when you look at a world history textbook, barely is ever mentioned the ancient civilizations of Ghana or Mansa Musa, who's one of the richest men, if not the richest man in history. He was an African man. The ancient kingdom of Timbuktu, the Timbuktu Library. All of this Black history that has been lost. It's not lost. It's been hidden. And so today, and getting back to your question again, as a university in the Black Studies Department, which I head, we're trying to reclaim that history. We're partnering with museums across the country. We've gone to Africa to do this work. We've done this work from the African side in Liberia. And we've been to London, and so it's global also, because it's all about the Pan-Africanism and trying to understand this anti-Blackness throughout our country and our world. And we're trying to right the wrongs and helping not just Black students, but white students. Some of my classes, I have all white students. And it's not about attacking white people and saying you're wrong and you all are racist. It's not about that. It's about trying to learn a larger story about American history and being intellectually honest about what went on. And so we that's our work every day, which is why I jumped at the chance to have the conversation with you guys, because this is what I want to be doing.
Oh, this is great. We appreciate having you here. So let me ask you that, because you did spark something I thought just now. But so you the school that you're teaching at, you have, I think the African American ratio there is about a little under 9%, about 8.66.
Yeah.
The white ratio is about 76%. How do you, so I guess what I'm going to say, I'm just going to be kind of blunt. I know you're running into some whites there in Kentucky that are like, I don't care about Black people in their history. So how do you combat that? I'm just being honest.
That's that's another one of those really great questions that you've been asking all evening. I'm saying this for a reason. I was the first African American in the history of the College of Education to earn tenure.
Okay.
And I'm saying this for a reason. For our audience, tenure is a lifetime appointment that professors get. It's legal protection.
Yep.
For us professors to be able to teach according to our convictions and to be able to speak out against, like, for example, in Kentucky right now, there was all of this anti CRT legislation, and then it was struck down, and then it evolved into anti-DEI legislation, and it was just recently dead in the water. It was vetoed, or they're going to veto it, and so they had all of this legislation in my state. And we have our board of representation, board of regent members that are connected to the state, and we're trying to pass this legislation to stop not only K-12 teachers from dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion, including teaching about women's studies. So it's very sexist, patriarchal kinds of rhetoric as well. And then they were trying to come after the professors and keep us from teaching about the history of African American history, critical race theory, and it was struck down. And so I have to be in a position where I can speak against that without losing my job. And so that's an example of how tenure protects us. And so historically, there has never been a African American at my college at Northern Kentucky University to get tenure. And so that's a testament to how much racism that we deal with from the students, and sometimes from the faculty, sometimes from faculty on our campus that are sometimes it's blatantly racist, sometimes it's passive aggressive, microaggression. But you see it a lot in student evaluations. Every semester, students evaluate the professors. And I have had a history of having racialized comments in my evaluations. For example, comments that says all he cares about is Black history. And so when are we going to learn real history? So in a class where I'm working with history teachers, I might spend two days talking about, or I might use one book dealing with African American history, and I might the other times deal with ancient Rome, because the class I teach, one of the classes I teach is interdisciplinary. So we deal with different time periods because I'm teaching them how to teach history. So we might talk about ancient Rome. We might talk about the Civil War. We might talk about the Roaring Twenties. But the minute I deal with anything Black history, especially during the election of our former president, the last election when Biden won, it got really, really tense and racist. And so to ask whether I experience from students is an understatement. I can't really overstate it, how much I've gone through with the students and wanted to leave and wanted to be in another context. But God wants me, this is what God wants me, so I can fight the good fight. And those are the times I would get death threats, when I sometimes speak publicly about these things. The crazy folks come out of the woodworks.
Well, we're going to keep you in our thoughts, because we need more like you that are out there that are fighting the good fight. And you keep doing what you're doing. You know, you're doing the right thing. So
thank you.
All right. So let me ask you this. So in your area, you've had, you know, on this topic of racism and things that are racist, there's a gentleman that kind of sickens a lot of the African-American population, but schools are allowing him to come into their schools. And I like the brashness of the students that are running the kid out, a guy named Mr. Rittenhouse. and kind of close to your area. What
Yes.
made your school not let them come in? Because I was looking to see.
Yeah. Turning Point is the organization. Turning Point USA.
Uh-huh.
So I want the audience to think about that. That's the nonprofit that supported and funded this guy.
Yeah.
And these people are well funded, and I know the host, you probably know this information, but these people are well funded.
Yep.
I've run into these conservative think tanks. They have millions and millions of dollars. And Turning Point USA, they advocate for conservative politics in high school, college, and universities.
Yep.
They've been trying to affect school boards. They have a professor watch list to monitor so-called liberal professors. Even during the pandemic, they were trying to see whether professors and universities were adopting mass mandates.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just pretty scary stuff.
Yeah.
And they're not done. They've been infiltrating school boards, trying to influence at Ohio State, for example. They were trying to influence the student government, people that were running for student government. They were trying to infiltrate that because they wanted to make sure that conservatives got on the student government organization election. They were trying to influence elections at the college student government at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So these are the folks that backed the individual that killed those two people.
Well, good segue. Let's talk about funding and the disparity, because just like you say, those organizations are well funded. They're fighting to change and eliminate, even all the way down to education, not just the laws in a respective town or city or state. They're looking at education. They're looking at school boards. So how do we combat some of these things that you're trying to fight against, and how do we keep these things funded?
That's a great question. School boards, by the way, are probably one of the most contested. It's the battleground today in politics. School boards are where the conservatives have identified that that's the battleground, the hearts and minds of the students. So in whether it's rural Kentucky or it's metropolitan New York, there are people. These people are well funded, and they have think tanks, and they have GoFundMe, and they are backing candidates, and they're incognito. Often you don't even realize that these individuals are funded. So what we need to do, one of the things I want to say that I think is very, very encouraging to the audience, there's a lot of people, still a critical mass of people that believe in democracy, that believe in freedom, that believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are so many people that, Anthony, that believe in what we're talking about, because the radical right will have you believe that they're great in numbers, that they're taking over, but there's a lot of people in power, in positions of power, that that are fighting the good fight. Yep. And so that's one thing, we can have hope in that. And there's funding on the other side too. There are grants out there, the diversity grants. There is National Geographic, organizations like National Geographic. You wouldn't believe if you could just simply go on their website, look at their K-12 resources. It's all about Black history, diversity, equity, inclusion. PBS. I'm doing a documentary with PBS for Kentucky Educational Television and PBS that's supposed to come out in the fall, August, September. And it's all about Black history. And so there are some well-funded non-government organizations like NPR that really understand that if we don't win this fight, we're going to see a very different America. And that's what I've been seeing, these entities that are outside the government, like the National Council of Social Studies, very progressive group. They're the flagship organization, academic organization that supports social education, history. They're connected to every teacher in all the 50 states. They have a huge international influence. Um, the You'll see senators at their annual conferences. You'll see, they're well funded.
Yeah,
They're well organized, and so there's some very powerful people that get it, and they're fighting a good fight. And so we have some good allies.
that's great. No, and we need them, because I think
Yeah.
the rate that we're going, what people are starting to see is that it is quick for us to
Right.
lose from the steps that we've taken, or the steps that we've gained. Uh, Look at it, affirmative action. I mean, we're super close to where it's going to be stripped out of even jobs, right?
Right.
Because there's companies that want to remove it from the jobs. They haven't done it as of yet, or maybe secretively they began doing it, but they just haven't 100% just announced that. Because if it's coming out of the colleges and it's being stripped out of colleges, then the
Right.
next place is for corporate America to start removing it. I'll jump on this part. Is
Yes.
It was used to get that stripped. White people at some point, they egged on the Asian community to
Right.
go after something that they were already winning. They were already the marginalized community that's been winning and getting pulled into the higher education levels, like what is deemed the higher schools, the Harvards, the Yales, the Princetons.
Right.
They were getting pulled into these schools at a higher rate than any other socioeconomic background or race throughout the United States. And
Right.
now they've destroyed an allyship that once was there between the Asians and African Americans. And now they're upset because they still remain at the same numbers. So they got used, which I call it, they got played.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
they got played, but they still, now they want help again. And I'm like, you've already burned your allyship.
Right.
So
I think that we have to realize a couple of things. The legislation, students for fair admissions versus Harvard,
mhm,
that's the case that overturned affirmative action, which was from the Supreme Court case of Grutter versus Bollinger
mhm,
in 2003. But we have to look specifically what that. And I have a friend that's a constitutional lawyer here at University of North Carolina University, and we had this conversation, and she kind of got me straight on some things. She said that the Supreme Court, the 2023 ruling, it ends affirmative action in higher education. What it means is that colleges can no longer consider race as a factor just for the benefit of the audience.
mhm.
And so colleges have to rethink how they're going to diversify their campus.
Gotcha.
Affirmative action in higher education came about as a practice of considering a student's background characteristics such as race when deciding whether to admit them or not. The practice originated from the 1960s
Mhm.
during the civil rights movement, and it aims to increase the number of, so it had good intentions. It wasn't reverse racism.
Yeah.
Which is a misnomer anyway,
Mhm.
because from my definition, ism means that one has to be in a position of power.
Yep.
And African Americans never have been in a complete position of power over the country. We've
Yep.
only had one black president. But anyway, it aims to increase the number of blacks, Hispanics, and other minorities on campus. And so what the legislation says is that you can no longer do that. But right as it stands, it like you said, ultimately they want to go into the workplace, they want to go into other organizations. But right now, it just simply says we can't. When we're bringing in students, we can't intentionally
Consider the race.
take race as a factor unless we. It has to be along other side things like alongside other things like first generation, socioeconomic, their experience. So we can still do it. We just have to be more creative about it.
Gotcha.
But what it does not do is get rid of diversity scholarships, because there's been a knee-jerk reaction. There's been some countries using this legislation to justify getting rid of minority scholarships and scholarships that benefit women, scholarships that benefit African Americans. The legislation doesn't call for that. Also, they've been going after programs like mine, like Black Studies programs and ethnic studies. but the legislation doesn't justify that. But I think people don't know that, and you know, once you do something in a space like I'm in, people just go along with it.
Yeah.
Well, the legislation must cover it, but there's nobody stepping in. If a dean makes that decision, or a college president says we're going to get rid of all of our diversity scholarships, and people just go along with it, like, well, the legislation says, you know, they struck down affirmative action, not across the board. So that's been my argument I've been making lately, probably too much. It's wearing me out.
Well, Dr. Childs, it's been a pleasure having you here at the Median Society. And anytime you want to talk to us about any books or any other prospective things that you're doing in the name of fighting the good fight, you let us know. We're always here. We appreciate. And is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we get out of here?
I just want to say thank you to the Media Society, Anthony, and the brothers here. You're co-conspirators. We need allies to do this work. I'm not a lone wolf. I'm always trying to build coalition. I believe in coalition building. Nothing I did or accomplished I did alone. I've always had the village. And so I just want to say to the audience, this is not about, because the rhetoric is that people that talk about diversity, equity, inclusion want to start arguments, want to make things complicated. They want special favor. That's rhetoric, and it's incorrect. It's inaccurate. What we're proposing is that we be more intellectually honest and not dishonest about our history, about world history, about U.S. history, and say that this country, this world is more diverse. It's not. Anytime we focus just on Eurocentric European history and Western values, we're being, again, intellectually dishonest. But we've got work to do. We've got to do our homework. There's no substitution for going back and reading the material and going back and getting an understanding of our country, of our own roots, of Native American history. If you want to talk about true Americans, we need to go back and look at our Native American history. So there's so much work we can do. There's no substitute for doing the work. And it's not about just complaining and indicting white people. That's a cop-out, and that's inaccurate. Nobody's saying that white people are bad. We're just saying that there's much more to the story that we have been told. And if we don't do something about it and stand up for it, we're going to see a very different world. And it's going to affect everybody. Everybody's going to begin to lose their rights. And so I'm going to speak the truth, even if my voice shakes. So thank you, brothers.
Thank you so much. And to all of you all out there, this is Dr. David Childs, Northern Kentucky University. You can look him up. He has a lot of things going on, and when you look him up, you see him seems to be taking part in a lot of just different areas. Sometimes he's on his public access television in Cincinnati, I believe. So pay attention. He always has great words, just great messages to talk about. Thank you so much for tuning in to this evening's episode of the Median Society. We really appreciate it, and we can't do this without you. Subscribe, like, and share on the different formats, whether you're listening to us in your car or if you're looking at us on your computer or on your smart TV at home. I'm your host, Anthony Mitchell, and good night.